Welcome to Dune chapter by chapter. I'm Dominic, and now this is the discussion portion of chapter 6. So in chapter 6, Paul is still in the training room. I believe that's how I picture it anyway, where we left him when he trained with Gurney, and his father has come to see him. So finally we get to meet Duke Leto, shows up in the story. Now we've heard about him in the other chapters, but this is the first time we've actually met him. So in this chapter, it's two of them discussing what's going to happen when they leave Dune, and in this chapter you kind of get to learn more about the politics of this situation that they're in, and more about kind of like how the politics of the Empire works. Also, we get to learn something else about Paul. So in the other chapters, it's stated that Arrakis is an obvious trap, and people have been trying to warn the Duke that this is a trap and they're headed straight into a trap, and he knows it's a trap. Even his enemies know that he knows it's a trap, but he's still going anyway. Because of the massive gain they're going to get, control of Arrakis and all the spice that comes with it. So in this chapter, Paul, asks him, why are we going to Arrakis? And the Duke explains to him, if we know it's a trap, why are we going? But before that, we kind of get a bit of an understanding of how the political machinations of why they're in this situation, because Paul says, well, the Duke is well aware it's a trap. He knows the Harkonnens are setting this trap for him. He knows there's going to be Harkonnen troops sent in there, but they're actually going to be Sardaukar disguised as Harkonnen troops. And he knows that there is this conspiracy between the Emperor and House Harkonnen to destroy him. But he's still going anyway, and his son wants to know why. So his son, well, why can't we just file charges against them in the open Landsraad? And put it towards the Landsraad that this is going on. So the Duke explains to him, well, we can't do that because no one's going to go against the Emperor. He'll just simply deny it. And they've got other enemies in the Great Houses besides the Harkonnens. Anyone that has like a stockpile of spice, anyone who's been stockpiling spice because of this change that's coming up, would potentially be their enemy. So there's just too much corruption in the system. They can't do it. If they tried to do it that way, it wouldn't work out for them. So the only way they got to do it is they have to go into the trap. And so his son asks him, well, if you know it's a trap, why are we going in there? Well, they have an ace up their sleeve that the Emperor and the Harkonnen have overlooked, that they don't realize. And that's the Fremen. So the Fremen up to this point are still very mysterious. We don't really know much about them. We know they're desert dwellers on the outskirts of the planet Arrakis. And so in this chapter, the Duke kind of counters him with another question. Well, what do you know about the home planet of the Sardaukar? And then Paul says, well, Salusa Secundus is supposed to be this horrible, nightmare, hellish world. And Duke Leto says, well, what kind of men would be brought up? If you wanted to bring up a fighting force, what better way to toughen them and make them brutal than to bring them up in very harsh environmental conditions? And so, that's the Sardaukar. And the Emperor has ways of getting their loyalty, out of them. This very brutal fighting force that the Emperor has. So Paul doesn't really get it. He doesn't really at first get to see where his father is going with this line of reasoning until his father brings up Arrakis. Arrakis has a very brutal, harsh environment, just like Salusa Secundus. And then it finally clicks for Paul, the Fremen. And he realizes, the Fremen. So then Duke Leto says to him, well, we've already sent a mission ahead of time to make contact with the Fremen, and that's our ace in the hole. What a fighting force they would make, potentially as great or greater than the Emperor's Sardaukar. And then it's interesting that the Duke says that they're going to go and they're going to try to exploit the Fremen. I find that interesting that he doesn't say like cooperate or make things better for the Fremen. So it's all about how they can use the Fremen to benefit themselves. That's an interesting choice of words. They're going to go and exploit the Fremen. And the Fremen have been exploited a lot in this book and manipulated a lot by all these great powers. It's an interesting thing. And they, and by going along with this and bringing all this manipulation basically ends in the destruction of the Fremen culture in later books. And what I find interesting is I'm not going to get into it in this chapter. That thought I'm going to save for a later chapter down the road. Don't want to jump ahead of myself. So the Fremen are, could be potentially be this brutal fighting force that could match the Sardaukar, and that's what the Harkonnens just thought of them as savages. They never just hunted them for sport. They didn't care about them. Didn't even bother to count them. So the Harkonnens and the Empire have no idea how many there even are, and they've totally underestimated that part. And so this is why the Duke's confident they can survive this trap on Arrakis. So now the other interesting thing that comes up in this chapter is we get mention the Spacing Guild, and we hear about a space highliner because they're leaving for Arrakis the next day. Now, what I find interesting about Frank Herbert's writing, is he doesn't really go into much detail about how anything looks in his world. Like, it's very low detail. It's just enough to give you somewhat of a mental image, and that's it. Like, when he describes the Duke's uniform, he just wears a regular black working uniform with a red hawk emblem on the breast. That's it. So that leaves a lot of room. You can imagine that a lot of different ways, that type of uniform, right? If you were to design it on paper, you could come up with a lot of different variations because it's very low detail. It's like, here's what the castle is like. Here's a castle, here's that. So when Paul asks, how big is a highliner? He says, his father just tells him in the book, it's huge. It's a very, very big spacecraft, this highliner. You can fit all of our frigates and transport ships in one tiny corner of this thing. And still room for more. But there's he doesn't describe anything else about the highliner, and to my knowledge, I don't think he does in the book. That's how his writing is. Now I personally don't. Now maybe that might bother some people because they would want more descriptive writing on how things look. To me, it doesn't really bother me. I kind of take it a little bit for granted though, because I've seen the 1984 film so many times, and I've saw the 1984 film before I've read the book. So when I first read the book, I already had mental images like built up in my mind from the 84 film. So when they talk about the highliner, I just picture the one from the 84 movie. Where I don't really know how it would be if there were no Dune movies and I was just reading the book for the first time fresh out the gate, how that would be. So that's just something I take for granted. But maybe some people wouldn't mind that because it just leaves more for your own imagination to picture whatever you want. Where a lot of writers would make it more descriptive. Like, I guess like another writer that is the opposite is Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I've read 2001: A Space Odyssey and all the other following sequel books in that series. And he goes into super detail about how the spaceships work, how they look, even how the bathroom works in those books, which I thought he went way overboard with the detail. Like, to me, that was too much detail. I didn't need to know how the bathroom worked on this one particular spacecraft that was in 2001: Space Odyssey. To me, that was going overboard. You could just, give me like a rudimentary shape, and then I can just picture the rest myself. So I don't mind that Frank Herbert does that. He just kind of gives you a quick, vague description of something, and then your imagination can just fill in the blanks for yourself. That's so that part of his writing, that doesn't bother me. It might bother other people, but it doesn't bother me. And the other thing that gets mentioned about the guild is the Space Guild navigators get mentioned in this chapter, and that no one's seen one. So in Dune, they never show, in the first book, they don't show the Space Guild navigators. You don't get a description of nothing or a complete mystery in the first book until you get to the later books. So in this one, it's just mentioned like, there's rumors that they used to be human, but they've mutated. They're not human anymore. And it's just a complete mystery. And then we kind of get a little insight on how their spacing policies work, because Paul wants to see one, but he says, well, no, you can't. Even their own agents that work with them never see them. And they have very strict rules. You can't go poking around outside your own frigates. You can't leave the ship, because if you do, you run the risk of losing your shipping privileges. So enemies, like mortal enemies, could have their ships parked right next to each other inside one of these ships, and neither one of them have anything to worry about, because if anyone started a fight or anything happened inside one of these spacing highliners, that particular house would lose their shipping privileges and then basically be cut off from the rest of civilization. So the guild is extremely powerful. They're like outside even the emperor can't control them. They're outside the emperor's reach. They're outside imperial control, the spacing guild. Now that kind of made me think, now in the new Dune 2020 film, will they show the Space Guild Navigator, or will they leave it a mystery? That's an interesting thing. I'm wondering if they're going to leave it a mystery. Like, would it be better not to show it, or would it be better to show it? I don't know. Maybe not the first movie, but leave it until the second half if they're going to do it that way, and then show what a Space Guild Navigator looks like. So the other thing in this book, in this chapter, I mean to say, is we get to learn that Paul is a Mentat, and he's been undergoing Mentat training. And then now it's come to the point where his father. Now we learn from this chapter that a Mentat is trained as a Mentat from very, very young age, but they cannot be told they're being trained as a Mentat, because if they're told they're being trained as a Mentat, it'll affect their training somehow. It'll screw their training up. So they have to wait till the person's at a specific age, and then they reveal to them that you're a Mentat, you have Mentat capabilities, you've been trained as a Mentat. Do you want to continue with the training, yes or no? So this is the point in time in Paul's life where they have to reveal to him that they've been training him as a Mentat. And so Paul's surprised at first. What do you mean I'm a Mentat? And then he realizes, oh yeah, it's not revealed to them until later on in life, and all the training he's received as a child now makes sense. So now he's going to be eventually he'll be the Duke someday, but he'll be a Duke Mentat, so he'll be extremely formidable, a formidable Duke. And the other thing is, he's also got Bene Gesserit and Mentat training, so he's a really unique individual in this world. He's ends up being very formidable because of that, and other things that happen to him in the book. So we get to learn that Paul is a Mentat. And then again, there's some foreshadowing of the Duke's death in this chapter at the end, when he smiles at his son, and then his smile almost takes on reminds Paul of a skull, because he has the Duke has thin features, so that when he smiles, it makes Paul think of a skull. So it's like his father got the shadow of death on him, because then he remembers what the Reverend Mother told him, for the father, nothing. So again, the Duke's demise is once again foreshadowed in this chapter. And then once it ends off Paul realizing, he's reminded again of this terrible purpose. He has this feeling that he has this horrible purpose. He's brought into the world for a terrible purpose. And this Mentat training is that pushing him further into this terrible purpose. So it's like he's on this path. He's starting to realize he's on this path of something horrible. He's going to be a horrible thing, and he doesn't know how to change it. And his new way of thinking just kind of overrides that and pushes it to one side. So a good chapter, introduces the Duke, and that we've heard about the last few chapters. And, we get to understand the politics of why the Duke is doing this, why they're going into Arrakis when they know it's a trap. So it's all more explained of why they can't do this or do another thing and all that, and then how they believe they can get out of this trap because they have ace in the hole with the Fremen. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one.